I did the segment the other week about the woke CIA, and I didn't think anything of it. The overwhelming majority of you agreed with the segment, but of course, some people on Twitter clipped it out of context and ran with it, and people who don't like me use that to come after me. Well, to my surprise, perhaps a little bit, somebody who I actually like caught wind of the clip, watched the clip, and responded to it. So this isn't a segment to attack this person. I view this as like an opportunity to further discuss this issue and dive into it and flesh it out and tell people what my position really is and what I think makes sense and what I think doesn't make sense. So you're going to hear a clip of the streamer Vaush, political streamer, lefty, named Vaush, and he's going to basically dissect this clip from my woke CIA video. Watch.
Intersectional. By the way,
oh, sorry. This is in response to that CIA woke ad, which, by the way, was terrible. Okay.
No actual person in the real world uses that term unironically. It just doesn't happen. In elitist liberal academic circles, they might talk about this shit, but that's not a normal common person. It's not. There is nobody who's working a 9 to 5 and trying to pay the fucking bills who's also, thinking about intersectionality and being cisgender. That doesn't happen. On top of bringing up intersectionality, she brings up the patriarchy. So now do you see what's going on here? And by the way, this is not going to stop. So this is the CIA's doing it. The FBI is going to do it. The Democratic Party has been doing it for the longest time. I'm not for Medicare for all. I'm not for free college. I'm not for a living wage. I'm not for ending the wars. I'm not for ending the drug war and freeing the nonviolent drug offenders. I'm not for any of the actual policies that are important and would fix the country and make everything better. But I will say the word intersectional, and I will give you my pronouns in my bio. And I will create an identity around my generalized anxiety disorder and make you feel like I'm relatable. I will, say I'm on the LGBTQ spectrum, or I'm cisgender, or, I believe in diversity, and I have people of color in my family, or I'm a person of color. They will give you everything when it comes to labels, social issues. And by the way, it's hilarious that the CIA is doing the Democratic Party trick. I believe in diversity. I'm strong. I'm proud. I'm a daughter of immigrants. I'm a woman of color. I'm perfectly made. I'm proud of me. I'm a cisgender millennial. I have generalized anxiety disorder. I'm intersectional. I despise the patriarchy. And by the way, my main job is going to be to press the button on the drones that blows up innocent people overseas.
There's the clip. There are a few others that follow it, but that's the main one. We can talk about that. I appreciate all the people in chat getting angry at Kyle Kulinski for saying exactly the sort of thing that I've said in the past, at least sometimes. So let's talk about what we liked and what we don't like, okay? So here are the things that I like. A lot of what he says for the majority of this video is kind of a paraphrasing of something Malcolm X once said about the symbolic gestures, the symbolic concessions. I'm not familiar with the full, or I don't remember the full quote. But the idea is essentially this. The elites, we can talk about politicians, we can talk about the CIA, we can talk about corporations, whatever, people with social power, are more comfortable placating to what we consider to be intersectional demands, intersectional wishes, than they are meaningful class-based issues. And that is completely true. I'm only pointing out that to conflate intersectionality and liberal identity politics just because the CIA used the term intersectionality in an advertisement is very irresponsible to me. And the opening statement from Kyle Kulinski, only liberal academics talk about this, strikes to me very similar to this really bad tendency I see from some populists online, where when they say the working class, what they mean is the white working class. There's a bit of an overlap there. Oh, the regular people, they don't deal with intersectionality. This is an academic thing. Well, to be fair, Marxist analysis is also not something the average person banties about, but the ideas are relevant to everyone. And to say it like that, it kind of makes it seem like, oh, progressivism, intersectionality, these are like frivolous, offhand issues cared about only by a collection of soy-faced academic elites. Real people care about working class issues. Hey, well, the most predominant working class demographic in America is and always has been brown and black people. If you want to criticize liberal idpol, go for it. God knows I do it. I do it all the time. But do not diss intersectionality or intersectional analysis just because the terms associated with it get misused, get cynically employed by corporations. Here's an interesting hypocrisy that I've noticed. All those leftists or left-leaning people who are like, intersectionality is stupid. We should focus on class issues. And the reason they say that is because like woke corporations misuse this terminology. You know what I mean? Like, I see that all the time. It's like, Coca-Cola had a Black Lives Matter stamp. Black Lives Matter has been co-opted by corporations. Why don't the types of people who say that ever complain about working class issues being co-opted by Tucker Carlson?
To be fair to Vaush, I don't know if that last part there that I showed you, and watch the whole video, I'll put the link in the video description box. I want you to get the totality of his comments, not just the snippets that I showed you. But, so to be fair to Vaush, I don't know if that last comment was directed at me, or I don't know if it's directed at some nondescript, populist lefty that he's talking about who's online. But, needless to say, and obviously you guys know this if you're watching this channel and if you do on a regular basis, that criticism doesn't remotely make sense when it comes to me. Because you can do a search, Secular Talk Tucker Carlson. In the history of this show, we've done 32 different segments on Tucker Carlson. The overwhelming majority of them are to go after Tucker Carlson, and the ones that aren't are like him debating John Bolton about the Iraq War, where Tucker's nominally taking the anti-war position, Bolton's taking the pro-war position, and even in those segments, what I typically do is say, and by the way, just so you know, even though he's right on this issue, he's generally a fraud, he's not really a populist, so on and so forth. So, listen, just to be clear about this, I went back and made sure, and I searched Secular Talk Tucker Carlson. Here's just some examples of the segments that I've done. Tucker Carlson defends loser corporatist John Delaney. Tucker Carlson smears Bernie Sanders. Tucker's staggeringly silly Green New Deal conspiracy. Tucker Carlson's very stupid attack on Ilhan Omar. Tucker Carlson pretends to be against elites on Fox and Friends. And then, listen, I think the irony, the most ironic part of this is as I was watching this clip from Vaush, and again, I don't know if he's specifically referring to me in that particular criticism. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt in the sense that we'll say he wasn't. He was critiquing some general, populist lefty. But as I was watching that clip, the most recent upload on the Secular Talk YouTube channel was fraud populist Josh Hawley opposes even moderate infrastructure bill. So if the idea is like, why aren't you critiquing the frauds on the populist right for weaponizing class issues? The response is simple. I am doing that. In fact, I do it all the time. In fact, a lot of my segments are going after Fox News hosts. And the reason I do that is because Fox News is still the number one name in news. And so a lot of people get swayed by that nonsense. So somebody's got to respond to it. Now, I respect others who focus more on internet culture, online culture, but I like to have a mix of the old school stuff and the new school stuff, because the old school stuff is still very important, even though many people online might not necessarily realize that. Okay, so that's the first point. The next one is, he says it sounds a lot like when I or people like me bring up the working class, it sounds a lot like I'm referring to the white working class only. I want to be clear about this. That 100% is not what I'm referring to. And I considered that so obvious that to make a distinction and be clear that I'm not referring to only white people seemed silly to me. But having said that, there's clearly a number of people who don't see it that way. Vaush is not the only person making these sorts of criticisms. There are others as well, and I'm going to get to one in a little bit. I like Vaush, and I actually like the other guy who criticized me, but I'm going to respond to the other guy's tweet as well in a little bit. But just for the sake of being extra clear, from now on, when I talk about the working class, I will either say the Rainbow Coalition working class or the multiracial working class. Now, is it a little annoying that I now have to put the thing that says, hey, by the way, I don't just mean white people? Yeah, that's really fucking annoying. And the reason it's annoying is because anybody who's familiar with this show knows when I say the working class, of course I mean people of all different races. And Vaush goes on to make the point like, hey, who makes up a lot of the working class? People of color. To which I respond, exactly. So why would anybody think when I say the working class, I'm referring to only white people? I mean, I honestly think it's ridiculous. But just for the sake of clarity, from now on, I'll say the Rainbow Coalition working class or the multiracial working class. Now, beyond that, there's one criticism that I think has some merit that I will correct. Well, actually, I guess this is the second one I'll slightly correct because I'm going to do the multiracial working class thing. But the other criticism that I think has a grain of truth in it is this idea that I unfairly lumped in intersectionality with liberal identity politics. And his argument is, yeah, criticize liberal identity politics all you want. I criticize liberal identity politics, but don't lump in intersectionality with it because that's not fair because intersectionality actually matters. Now, the concept of intersectionality is not something that I'm against. And the idea, for those of you who don't know what it means, and I know most of you do know what it means, but just to sum it up in layman's terms, it means that all these different political issues are linked and they're all related, so you should care about a variety of the issues. That's the idea behind intersectionality. So, my problem isn't with intersectionality, the concept. I agree with the concept of caring about a variety of issues because they're all linked. My issue is with the literal term intersectionality. And the reason I have an issue with the literal term is because it's insular and off-putting to most normal people. Now, people also come after me for saying most normal people. When I say most normal people, I include people of color. I include the LGBTQ community. I'm talking about the overwhelming majority of people, full stop. And if you don't think that that word is off-putting to most normal people, you're not talking to most normal people on a regular basis. You're just not. Sorry. You know, it might be in certain cliques online that might be super popular to use the term intersectionality, but in the real world, it's just not. And if somebody disagrees with that, I just think you're factually wrong. And by the way, to prove my point, now I haven't seen polling on that specific term, but if you look at the woke vernacular and how popular it is in broader society, this is the point. There was a poll recently where they asked Hispanic people, do they use the term Latinx? You know what percentage does? 3%. That's my point. That's my point, is that the language, the terminology is incredibly insular and subculture-y. And if you want to be part of an insular subculture, okay, by all means, go right ahead. I'm not knocking you for it. But my point is, don't pretend like it has broad appeal, because it fucking doesn't. It just doesn't. So he goes on to bring up this thing called the Nazball vortex, however you say it. The idea is like, oh, you know, you don't want to be part of the people aligning the far right with the far left, so like Nazis with Bolsheviks, because that's a dangerous game to play, and those people are our enemies, so on and so forth. My only rebuttal to that is, I never tell people it's okay to be far right, to be an extremist. In fact, my record shows I deconvert people from the far right. In fact, that's the thing I'm most proud of. Now, the most proud of, before it was Justice Democrats or it was a tie with Justice Democrats. Now the thing I'm most proud of is when I go to Politicon or one of these events, the number of people who come up to me who say, hey, I was a Ben Shapiro fan. Hey, I was a Steven Crowder fan. Hey, I was going down the alt-right pipeline. And I saw your stuff and it took me out of that, and now I'm a lefty. I lost count of the number of people who said that to me. And that really makes me proud. That really makes me happy. That's the single most important thing. Because I'm changing minds. Now, listen, I don't need to tell Vaush this. He changes minds also. I know it as a matter of fact. I've seen it. So I guess my point would be, you can't just call anybody who has a slightly different approach to you or take slightly different positions on issues part of the Nazball vortex as if now I'm somehow part of the problem or the populist left is somehow part of the problem. That's just factually wrong. Part of the process of deconversion from the far right, and this is really important, I want to stress this, is giving credit where it's due. That's part of the process of deconversion. And then when you hit them with the criticism, they're more likely to listen to it because you also gave credit where it's due. So, you know, there's a lot of libertarians who watch my show. Why? Probably because I'm in favor of ending the wars. Probably because I'm in favor of legalizing marijuana. There's a number of positions I have where I line up with libertarians, even though on economic issues, I disagree with them massively. The fact that I'll say, hey, you guys have a point on this thing, means they go, interesting, let me listen to the rest of what he has to say. That's an important part of the deconversion process. You can't just have guns blazing all the time for everybody around you, no matter what the details of what they're saying is, because then you're siloed off in your own little corner and you're never going to win. You're never going to gain support. You're never going to push the movement in the right direction. So I think that's another important point. But I want to get even more specific. So let's get to my criticism of wokeness, okay? My criticism of wokeness is twofold. Number one, it's exploited by the powerful and used as a leftier-than-thou veneer. That's the CIA thing. And the CIA has done this a number of times. Corporate Democrats do this all the time. When these powerful institutions cave on the symbolism, they're caving on the symbolism. They'll use your terminology, they'll use your words because nothing hinges on it. And if anything, it reinforces these institutions of oppression and subjugation because then they turn around and say, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm in agreement with you guys. I'm with you all the way. Look, I said patriarchy. I said intersectional. I said, whatever, fill in the blank with whatever woke term you want to use. So my first criticism of wokeness, I don't know how anybody could argue against that because that's just factual. And Vaush doesn't argue against that. He agrees with that. But my second criticism of wokeness, put policy aside for a second. Just put it aside. Because on actual specific issues, I'm not sure there's any disagreement between Vaush and I in terms of what policies we'd implement in the country on these social issues. But policy aside, the language and terminology of woke culture is insular and alienating and sectarian, which is the opposite of universal. So the culture is purposefully a subculture, and you don't embrace a subculture if you want to win. You embrace an edgy subculture if you want to be in a cult with a small niche group. Now, again, I'm not knocking you if you want to do that, but don't fucking pretend like you're popular, because you're not. Don't pretend like my point is wrong when I say most common normal people are not walking around talking about how my generalized anxiety disorder and my intersectionality and my hatred of the patriarchy and my cisgenderism or my asexuality or whatever, like, if you bring that stuff up and talk about it casually as if this is what regular people working 9 to 5 are casually chatting about, it's just fundamentally not true. And when I say common normal people, I don't just mean white working class people. I mean people of color. I mean the LGBTQ community themselves. So those are my two criticisms. Number one, wokeness is exploited by the powerful and used as a leftier-than-thou veneer argument. And it's basically just caving on symbolism because nothing hinges on the symbolism, and they know that, so it reinforces institutions of oppression and subjugation. The second criticism is that, policy aside, the language and terminology is insular and alienating and sectarian, which is the exact opposite of universal. If you're on the left, you believe in universalism. The culture is purposefully a subculture, and you don't embrace that if you want to win. You have to appeal to the majority of people whether or not you like it. Now, again, am I saying that you're not allowed to call yourself whatever you want to call yourself? Use whatever gender terminology you want to use? No, call yourself whatever you want to call yourself. No problem with that whatsoever. Identify however you want to identify. No problem with that whatsoever. The point is, don't pretend like that shit is what's popular and that shit is what wins elections, because it's just not. It's just not that. So the last thing I want to respond to is another guy I like, Adam Johnson of Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting. When I responded to the tweet of me out of context attacking the woke CIA video, I said, hey, thanks for sharing. This is some of my best work. And then I said, this is I'm attacking the woke CIA stuff here. If you think I'm actually like anti-diversity, then LOL. Like, that's the silliest thing I've ever heard. But Adam Johnson responded to the tweet. He said, this is pretty pat and boring right-wing anti-PC griping. I'm confused. Is it your contention normal common people have no awareness of cisgender as a term? You are aware most LGBTQ people aren't elite and work 9 to 5, right? And majority of them are aware of these concepts. So let's break this down. He says, this is pretty pat and boring right-wing anti-PC griping. It's only right-wing if you define it as such. You say any talk of political correctness or wokeness from this perspective is by definition right-wing. Now, you can make that claim, but I don't agree with you. And the fact that I have this position, somebody who's clearly a leftist, and over 95% of my lefty audience agrees, and I know that because of the like to dislike rate on the video, well then, perhaps you might want to concede that indeed this is not, by definition, right-wing. But my guess is he's defining it as that because that's how he views it. That if anybody criticizes wokeness or political correctness, that by definition is right-wing. So I disagree right off the bat. It's not right-wing. You could smear it and call it right-wing, but it's not. It's inconvenient that a lot of lefties happen to agree. Then he says, I'm confused. Is it your contention normal common people have no awareness of cisgender as a term? No, my claim is normal common people don't use the woke vernacular and the woke terminology in everyday life. And this is the part that pissed me off. You are aware that most LGBTQ people aren't elite and work 9 to 5, right? Yes, Adam, I'm very aware of that. And when I talk about normal common people, I'm talking about the Rainbow Coalition. I'm talking about the multiracial working class. But it's amazing to me that a lot of people, when you talk like this, they assume you're talking about only white guys in hard hats in 1950 in a union. Why are you assuming that? That has a lot more to do with you than it does me. Because my default, obvious position is that when I talk about normal common people, of course I'm including LGBTQ people. Of course I am. And most LGBTQ people don't use woke vernacular. Most people of any minority group don't agree with the woke vernacular. Now, again, I have no polling on this specific term, cisgender. I looked for it, I couldn't find it. But what I did find was a poll on the term Latinx. And very respected polling company, I don't know if it was Gallup or Pew or whoever, they asked Hispanics, do you use the term Latinx? And again, only 3% of them said, yes, I do. That's my point. That's it. That's the whole point. That's the whole point. Normal common people, including people of every minority group who are part of the working class, of course, they don't use your terminology. They don't. That's just a fact. That's just a fact. Now, again, you don't have to like that, but it's a fact. So that's probably the criticism that most got under my skin is this idea that, like, when I'm referring to the working class, I only mean white people. Why would anybody ever think that? Because you're actually straw-manning people who believe what I believe and assuming that there must be some bigotry somewhere in there for them to make the claims that they're making. And I'm sorry, but that's just not true. Now, final thing I'll say is, to prove my point that when I derided intersectionality, I didn't mean the concept, I meant the actual literal term. I say in the exact video that Vaush is responding to, I bring up Medicare for all, free college, living wage, ending the wars. I want to talk about justice for people of color overseas who are being killed by U.S. empire, and freeing nonviolent drug offenders, and legalizing, taxing, regulating drugs. The drug war disproportionately targets people of color. When I talk about all those issues, that's intersectionality. You care about all these issues that affect all these different communities. That's intersectionality. I'll go further. Do I support transgender folks being a protected class in the same way that racial groups are protected classes? Yes. Yes. 100% I do. So do I care about all these issues? Of course I care about all these issues. I believe in intersectionality as a concept. What I don't believe in is pretending like the term intersectionality is popular and that most people use it when they don't. They don't use Latinx. They don't use intersectionality. They don't talk about the patriarchy. And again, define yourself or however you want to define yourself. Use whatever terms you want to use. Just stop pretending like it's popular because it's not. That's the point. It's not popular. Nobody uses that vernacular except liberal elite academics and very tiny niche subgroups. Now, that's the problem that the left faces. And I really think this is maybe the most important point, is that the left, at the same time, they want to win and get power and implement our policies, they also sort of want to remain its own little exclusionary, edgy subgroup. You have your niche little fellow members of your cult that believe everything you believe, and you want at the same time be countercultural and the dominant cultural force. You cannot have it both ways. You cannot have it both ways. Now, am I arguing you give in at all on actual policy issues? No, not at all. Not at all. But I am arguing you do whatever the fuck you have to do strategically to win. And if that means dropping the edgy vernacular, who gives a fuck? Drop it. Drop it, drop it, drop it. Drop it now. Drop it ASAP. So that's my take overall. This is a very, very long segment, but I felt like it was important. Because again, I like Vaush. He's done some great work. He's debated so many asshole right-wingers. He's deconverted a lot of people. He does a lot of solid coverage. Him and I have disagreements, but that's fine. You disagree with a lot of people, right? Like, you're never going to agree with somebody on everything. But this needed clarification, and this issue needs to be dissected more, because there's just this straw manning of people who are on the populist left as if, you know, we're somehow a few steps away from fanboying Tucker Carlson or some shit, when I would put my record of calling out Tucker Carlson's bullshit against fucking anybody. That's not an ancillary point. It's not a coincidence that I'm also super fucking tough on that guy. I'm gonna call out the bullshit wherever I see it. That's what I'm gonna do. And if sometimes it happens to be at targets that are sacred cows on the left, too fucking bad. Too fucking bad. Because I'm interested in actually winning and getting our policies implemented. I am a policy purist, and strategically, I'm the opposite. I'll do anything that works strategically in order to win. You could be a strategic purist, but if you keep losing, then you're going to keep losing. It's very simple. And this sort of stuff, I do think, hurts. It doesn't help. So anyway, I want to give Vaush an open invitation to come on Crystal Kyle and Friends. It'll be a friendly conversation. We can dive into this issue and many more issues. I've talked with him a little bit about it previously. He's, agreed to come on. We were originally trying to get him in studio. Now, we'll do it remote, totally fine. So whenever he wants to come talk to me about this issue and other issues, we have disagreements about some burning your bus stuff, whatever. We could talk about all that stuff and more. So let's come on. You can come on and have this dialogue. And I also want to thank him for, in the criticism, being respectful and not needlessly hyperbolic and showing some human decency, because oftentimes online is a hellscape and people are vicious and they smear and they malign intentions and all this stuff. He didn't do any of that. His criticism was very respectful, very honest. And so that's why I'm more than happy to have a conversation with him. Consider this the open invitation.